Welcome everybody to a new edition of our PMF Connect. My name is Julia, I'm the product manager of Product Management Festival, and I'm gonna hand it over to Grace right now to introduce you to our today's session.
Thanks, Julia. Hi, everyone. I'm Grace Chamolu from Product Management Festival, and thank you all for joining us for our 4th edition of the PMF Connect. Today's topic will be on rolling out massive product changes at scale. And our guest host today is Dave Meyer from Atlassian. For those of you who haven't been with us before, these PMF Connect sessions are a monthly way for us to be able to continue the conversation outside of the annual PMF event. You would be able to hear from our guest host, share a few minutes about their thoughts on the topic at hand, and then we'll open up the session for your questions. So feel free at any time to send in your questions via the chat window on the side of your screen. So with that, let me go ahead and introduce you to our guest host for today. Dave Meyer is the Senior Product Manager at Atlassian, working on Jira Cloud. He leads teams working on Jira's core features and like project administration and Jira's APIs and developer ecosystem. He spoke at PMF 2017 on how PMs thrive in a DevOps world. Prior to Jira, Dave helped launch and grow the Atlassian Marketplace. You can usually find him on a plane somewhere between Sydney and Europe. So thank you very much for joining us today, Dave.
Thanks.
Before we get started, how about if you could just share with us a little bit more about what you do at Atlassian in your role?
Yeah, so I've been a product manager on the Jira team specifically for about 4 years. So within Jira, I've led all types of projects from internal engineering projects to projects that focus on our third-party developer ecosystem to the primary thing that I'm working on right now, which is one part of a massive series of investments that we're making all over the Jira Cloud, basically an overhaul of the entire user experience of Jira Cloud. So I've got one corner of that I'm in charge of. So I'm every day leading the engineering efforts on that with a couple different development teams, along with an amazing set of engineering leads and designers who are trying to design the future of collaboration. And so I'll be talking today a little bit about how we've been rolling out those changes across not just my individual teams, but this entire program of a dozen different development teams, all changing different parts of a very large-scale product all at once, and how we scaled all of that up and what we kind of learned along the way.
Wow, that sounds very exciting and surely not boring. Well, thank you very much. Why don't I go ahead and turn it over to you then? So I know that you do have some thoughts to share about the topic. So
great. So let me just pull up my presentation. I'm going to assume that people can see it. Just shout if you can't. So what I wanted to talk about today in the 5-10 minutes that I have is just a quick introduction to the kind of change we're rolling out, and then some strategies that we've basically kind of the problems that we discovered when you try to roll out massive product change at scale, and then some strategies that we've I wouldn't say knew up front, but definitely discovered along the way and have kind of put into place as we kind of make our way through the biggest set of changes, rolling this out to our customers, and how I think that they can apply, whether you're, an organization the size of Atlassian and have millions of users that you need to roll out those changes to, or you're Google and you are rolling out to billions of users, or you're much, much smaller and just rolling out to hundreds or like thousands. But either way, like the principles that I should be sharing are basically applicable to any time you have user-facing change that you need to release. And then I'm excited to just kind of kick off a discussion and answer any questions and hear other folks' thought on the topic, or honestly any topic related to product management. So when I talk about massive change, I guess the first question is, how big is massive? In the case of, when I think about the size of the change, it's not just the number of users that you're rolling out to, but the extent of the user-facing change that they're going to see. And so in the case of Jira Cloud, what we've been releasing to customers over the last 6 to 9 months, and will continue to release over the next 6 to 12 months, is kind of the culmination of years of design work and rethinking of the product and alignment across Atlassian's product and marketing properties, and then trying to unify all of Atlassian's different products. And so there's a big investment in Jira specifically, and in trying to make Jira easier to use. But simultaneously, we're also working on bringing Jira and Confluence and Stride and Bitbucket and all of Atlassian's products into alignment. So that started with an entire redesign of the navigation of Jira itself. So we used to have a horizontal navigation across the top, moved to a sidebar-based navigation structure. At the same time, we were changing the general look and feel of the product. So different color scheme, different font scheme, an entirely new style and feel. And we were simultaneously changing the way, not just the fonts and colors, but the layout, design, and actually the underlying technical stack that the entire user-facing part of the application ran on. So, and that meant touching some of the most viewed pages in Jira. If we look at Jira as which pages account for the vast majority of the page views that we have in Jira, it's our boards, which show teams the kind of tasks that they're working on. So we're redesigning how those boards look and feel. And then the issue view itself. Issues are kind of the core thing that Jira deals with. They're our primary object. And so, and the viewing issues in some form accounts for the vast majority of all the page views that we see in Jira. And so changing the issue view itself even a little bit is a big task. Completely overhauling it is something we've never done in the history of our Jira development, at least in kind of a systematic way. And then finally, we're at the same time also rebuilding the entire project settings section. And that's not just kind of a look and feel, lift and shift kind of redesign, but actually rethink of the entire structure of how you set up and configure the application. I'm not sure how clearly the GIFs are coming across in the presentation, but hopefully it gives you some sense of the scale of all the changes that we're kind of embarking on, and really embarking on simultaneously, where we have a bunch of different teams that are all trying to manage, that have a charter of something that they want to simplify and improve, but at the same time, progressively and confidently release them all to our customers. And so why is rolling out UI change hard? The first challenge is really just like a question of scale. It's not just that we have a lot of change that we want to roll out. A lot of change involves a lot of risk, and rolling it out across a large surface area is inherently risky. If you have, you can say what's the definition of a low risk change? If you say this is going to be totally fine for 99% of customers, 1% of customers might run into a problem. But if you say, well, 1% of 1,000,000 customers is 1,000 customers, 100,000, yeah, 1,000 customers, and that's 1,000 support cases, then that might be a massive unacceptable impact. The second reason is something called change aversion. If you're a product manager and you've been doing anything involved with the user interface, you probably stumbled upon the concept of change aversion at some point or another. Change aversion is basically the inherent resistance that people have to any kind of change once they're oriented to a user interface. So even if the long run impact of the change to a user interface is positive, as you can see here, a bunch of different patterns but the key takeaway is that more often than not, whether you have an initial aversion and then it comes back to neutral, hopefully an initial aversion and then you finish with delight, and customers eventually realize that the long run changes were for the best and they prefer it in the long run. But maybe you won't have that, and you have an initial aversion and then you never recover and you never get back to the original state. I wonder what the product managers at Snapchat are currently thinking right now, because if you had to ask me where Snapchat is right now, they're somewhere in the bottom of one of these troughs. And then finally, sorry,
Dave. Sorry to jump in. I actually, for your slides, I love the stories you're telling, but I actually don't think I can see the slide you're on.
Huh. Let me.
Oh, okay.
All good. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay. Let me try one more time. Can you all good?
Perfect.
Can we see?
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
So change aversion. These are the troughs. Hopefully people saw them. If not, I'll definitely be sharing the slides later. So like I said, rolling out the UI, change is hard because you basically high risk, little reward kind of tied into change aversion. So there's usually, because of change aversion, customers are going to have very, I guess, I don't know, high expectations is the right word. Basically, if you get it right and you leave it better, customers will just say, okay, and they probably won't even notice. And if they don't like it in any way, you're going to hear it, and you're going to hear it pretty negatively. So we've kind of landed on a couple different tactics that we think kind of form the basis of how we approach rolling out the change, and they kind of build on one another. And I definitely don't think these are the end all be all. And if I was giving this presentation in 3 months, I think I would have another section, which is some of the stuff that we're doing that's building on these today. So come back to me in 3 months and I might have some even better ideas. But it all starts for us with feature flagging. The feature flagging is kind of key to any product manager's toolkit. It's something I talked about during my original session back in November at the Product Management Festival. We use a product called Launch Darkly to manage the feature flags across all of Atlassian's products. So this is a screenshot of a real feature that we're really rolling out in Jira. So we've basically Launch Darkly or similar tools allow you to basically integrate their library directly into the product and then set up all kinds of prerequisites, targeting rules, variations. They give you an audit log of changes to the configuration of that feature flag. But all of those are really key to the stuff that you might want to do with feature flags down the road. They're basically a way to separate out the change in your code from actually releasing that change to users, and it gives you a nice understandable UI rather than having to make changes to your code every time you want to change who's seeing the changes that you're rolling out. So the number one benefit of a feature flag is that it reduces risk. So if you make a mistake, if there's a bug or customers react way more negatively than you might have expected, you always have an easy off switch. So it's kind of key to preventing major negative incidents. Is just something's going wrong. First step, hopefully you can just turn it off and then assess the situation and then potentially turn it back on. They also provide the foundation for targeting. So using all of those prerequisites and cohorts, those are the kinds of things that allow us to release a feature to just certain segments of our customers. And then they enable progressive rollouts where we can say, okay, just enable to pick a random set of 10% of customers, 20% of customers, 50% of customers. And so we can at least we can reduce risk by just enabling a feature to more and more customers over time, which even for these smallest features, we almost always take that kind of approach, just because there are really very few features that you need to release to all of your customers immediately. And therefore, you're almost always better off, even if it's not a change where you need to experiment and say, like, how do customers behave when A versus B, you can always just reduce the risk of releasing a piece of code by doing it progressively. And so they basically, and that builds into our second tactic, which is cohorts. So basically, we spent a lot of time dividing our customers up into different types of cohorts. And cohorts are kind of key to all of our rollout management. There's a couple reasons why you want to roll out with cohorts. The first one is that it allows you to segment your customers in a way that allows you to ship more value sooner. Obviously, you want tight feedback loops whenever you're making big UI changes. And sometimes you might say, all right, we're going to change this entire page, but you know that certain customers are using 100% of the things on the page, and certain customers are only using 10% of the things on the page. So what you can do is only change the temp. You can find that smallest segment of usage and create a cohort of people who are using a feature around that, and then only change the parts that they're using, ship that to them, and then build a little bit more, ship to a little bit more people who are using more features, then build a little bit more, and can progressively roll it out. That's exactly what we've been doing with the issue view, for example. We look at all the features that people use on the issue view, and then we've been progressively rolling it out to people who are kind of more and more sophisticated with our products. Similarly, you might want to divide your cohorts by but in another situation, it might be pretty valuable. Another benefit is it allows you to collect feedback and iron out those issues. So you can say, well, we're only going to release to 5%. We'll collect feedback on this specific cohort that we know we're going to get the right feedback from, and iron out the issues, and then we'll try to roll out to a different cohort of people. So first, we're going to use a really simplistic example. We're going to roll out to everybody in English, and then we will roll out to everybody in Spanish, and then we will roll out to everybody in German, and that way you can kind of isolate each cohort that way if you want. And finally, it allows you to take each cohort, and you can have kind of a different policy for each one. So you want to genuinely, and like I'd say probably Google is probably the pioneers in all of these different ways to sunset things or migrate people over time. So first, you build up a new experience and you let people opt into it. And then you start saying, well, maybe I'll be a little bit more aggressive and pop a banner on the site and say, click here to opt into it. And then I'll start putting people into the new experience first, and then I'll let them opt out. And then I'll make it a little bit harder for them to opt out. And then I'll say, okay, well, you can't really opt out anymore, but if they call, they can actually opt out. And then finally, you finally sunset everything completely and forced everybody into the old experience, and you can group the customers that are in each of those modes based on a cohort of feature usage or some other attribute. And we can track that with a survival curve, which I'll get to in a second. So the keys to creating cohorts is first understand your tenants, your customers, your users, the different attributes and dynamics that you might want to segment them based on that would be relevant when you're rolling out those types of changes. And then think about how you can prioritize and sequence those in a way that helps you ship as much value to as many people as early as possible, because that's really the entire point of this, is that it's not to slow down your rollout, it's to speed it up by shipping the right things to the earliest possible set of people so that you can get feedback and hear back from them. And then definitely something that more of a tactical thing that we've learned from experience is that it's much easier to kind of look at all of those attributes and define the attributes and then say, all right, we're going to group all of the customers that have this set of attributes into this cohort, rather than in that kind of feature flag screen saying, all right, if this and this and this and this and this and this and this, then show them the new thing. If you have to kind of analyze all that at runtime, first it can hurt your application's performance, but probably more critically than that, it just becomes really, really complex for development teams that already have a lot going on to try to manage, okay, based on all of these different criteria, should they be seeing the new feature or should they not? And so finally, this is probably the most complex part, is survival curves, which are something that we've kind of adopted based on the cohorting work we've already done. Not like the TV show. Survival curves, I actually don't, I think it's called the Kaplan-Meyer curves in my notes. Somebody could probably correct me if I'm wrong. It's a statistical concept. Basically, apologies if I got this scientific name wrong. Basically, the idea is that you take each of your individual cohorts and you see how long that you put them into a new experience. You make some kind of change, and you see how long that change plays out. Basically, until, in our case, they opt out. So there's a couple of reasons why, if we kind of enable a change and allow an opt-out, we can't basically just say like, okay, well, 90% of customers opted out. They're the two biggest reasons, and so we know that we probably shouldn't have released that change, or we need to make some changes before we re-enable it for everybody. The reasons why you struggle with that is because, one, people can opt back in and then opt out, and so it's very difficult to measure what that opt-out rate was. And secondly, it doesn't really capture the rate of opting out over time. So let's say we release a change to 100 people and 10 opt out on the first day. You could say, well, that's looking pretty bad, because if on day 2, 10 more people opt out, then by day 10, you're going to have 0 people that 100% of people are going to have opted out. But maybe on day 2, you make some improvements and slowed that opt-out rate down, and maybe only 5 people opt out on the second day. And then on the third day, you made more improvements and only 1 person opted out, and it flattens out. And you actually did a pretty good job because you turned on a feature and 85 people are still using it. There's a couple, when you're setting up a survival curve, it's pretty key to plan these in advance. You have to kind of define, similar to an A/B test or anything, your cohort and the experience that you're going to test and the exact date that you're going to enable it in order to make sure you're analyzing these properly. It's good to, if you're a product manager, to have a data scientist or an analyst, if you have access to that in your organization. It's definitely helpful. you want to make sure that you're only trying to measure one thing at once. So you should try to isolate different possible changes that could be affecting that survival curve rate. And obviously, it's not a replacement for other analytics. You shouldn't just turn on everything and then watch the survival curve. You should be still validating any change that you make. You should still be tracking, all your other metrics like users or conversion rates or NPS or whatever the KPIs are for your product, your company. And you shouldn't let it substitute for qualitative feedback either. When users opt out, the most important thing you can do is ask somebody why, because that's going to be the thing that tells you how to prevent more users from opting out. And then you want to tie it back into, again, those same KPIs. This is a quick glance at how it looks. So each of those kind of colored lines represents a cohort of Jira customers that received like the new version of something, and then the percent, and then as you can see, those kind of declines are the percentage of users that still had that experience over time. So you can see that for different products or different cohorts, we kind of got better. Like so basically we could see that like that magenta, the pink one, those were the customers that were most likely to stay with the new experience, and the ones at the very bottom and orange, they kind of opted out sharply. We could see that those customers really didn't like the new experience. And so we can compare those cohorts and say, okay, what do we need to do to make sure that we get more lines that look like the pink one and less lines that look like the orange one. So that's it. I know that it was probably a lot of content for 15 minutes, but I would love to answer questions here from other folks. And thank you very much for all of your time and attention.
Thanks so much, Dave. That was really interesting. I'll mention if anybody has any questions, please feel free to submit it through the chat window. I'm actually going to ask a couple follow-on questions for you, Dave. One thing I'll probably just mention is you were talking about in the screen that you just showed about the cohorts and the survival curves. I find them very fascinating. So with the survival curves, how many are you tracking? I just want to see if I understand it, because it seems like you have a survival curve, for example, that might go on a particular feature, and so you have cohorts that are part of that curve. So would you then be tracking multiple survival curves based on?
So you usually want to, like I think I said, you want to try to set something up in advance, because you want to. It's difficult if you're trying to track. You can't. You might say, all right, we're going to start a bunch of people on Monday and then start a bunch of other people on Friday, and we're going to turn on the same experience for both of them. And that usually it's 9 out of 10 times it's probably fine, but it's not necessarily going to be scientifically correct.
Right.
Something might have changed between Monday and Friday. What you really want to do is say, okay, we're going to roll out to these groups of people all on Friday, and we're going to see the people that got either this experience or had these attributes and how long they survived in the new experience versus how much time this other cohort of people survived in the new experience. So you have group A, we'll say those are all the customers with 500 active users, and group B is all the ones with 499 or less, and like let's compare to see which cohort has the higher opt-out rate. But
and the opting out is like switching back to the old one, or what?
Yeah, so it's kind of the original scientific basis for this type of analysis is actually like like basically you would infect like 100 specimens with a disease, and you'd see like the rate at which the specimens died. So it's like obviously applied to product management, it's a little bit different. So in our case, it was usually opting out of the new experience that we were rolling out to. And that's not, typically, you opt out and then, but you could opt back in. And so a lot of times what we would do is we would say, okay, if you do opt in, how likely are you to stay opted in versus eventually, opting out again? Or we let you enable it, and then how long are you going to stay in? And then we come back to you. Maybe you opted out, and then 2 weeks later we come back to you again and prompt you to enable it again, and you say yes, and then we look at your survival curve again.
And then eventually does it happen that you just switch to the new one if you have a certain percentual opt-in rate?
For absolutely the goal when you talk about going back to like the change of version, or any type of kind of customer migration, whether it's a data migration from one product to another product, or from anything from X to Y, like the best type of migration you want to do is the one where customers migrate themselves. And so ideally, any customer that we can get to opt into the change is one that we don't have to force into the change down the road. And so definitely, we want to stagger and give customers as many opportunities to choose to move into the change, and get their feedback along the way, so that we can entice them rather than force them. But at the end of the day, you're always going to have that segment of people who aren't going to adopt any change until they're forced into it. And I think as a product manager, building products for humans, like you have to respect that. Like I can't think of every product use case in the world, but for a product like Jira, we are definitely conscious of the fact that people don't go into Jira because they really want to use Jira. They're going into Jira to get something done. And so if we are making changes to the UI, even if we think that they're the greatest changes in the world that are going to improve all of our conversion rates and bring in tons of new customers, and people are going to love it in the long run. In the short run, what's really happening is that the button that used to be over here is over there now, and that slowed me down for my task, and I had something I needed to get done today. We hear customers all the time. It's like, I got a project that's shipping on Friday. I don't have time to deal with your UI changes right now. And like, those are you can't pretend that your product needs are greater than their product needs.
And do you find, for example, with people where they need to now learn what has changed, how are you communicating that? Because I think a lot of these are either it's subtle or it's different, or as you mentioned, it's rolled out in very in increments. So is it more on the documentation side, a little tutorial video, or more of just tooltips showing up?
Yeah, totally, all of the above. So definitely, when we as we've gone through this series of changes, one of the kind of buzzwords that we have adopted is change boarding, which is kind of like onboarding, but when you're onboarding your existing customers to the change, and that's something that I think we weren't very good at when we first started releasing some of these UI changes, and we've gotten better at over time. Where our patterns and consistency around how do we place those pop-ups? How do we make sure that if we're changing both the search and the board, and somebody opens search on top of the board, they don't get two different cases at the same time? How do we integrate both? Okay, you're landing on a screen that looks different for the first time, and you see you get like a modal or a dialogue or something that says, "Hey, welcome to the new board." How much of that information do we communicate in the product where we know you see it? Potentially, we can force you into seeing it by forcing you to click it, and maybe hopefully you read it at that point. Versus how much do we information do we move to the documentation and say, like, if you want to learn more about this, learn more, down to we absolutely because definitely. For our products, and certainly a lot of other products in the similar boat, where you have kind of a lot of people who are using the product at a company, but maybe only a smaller number of people whose kind of heads are on the line for, they're the person in charge of Jira at the company or something like that. And so just they think Jira is my responsibility to the rest of the users at my company, and so we try to notify those people in advance, or give them an earlier opportunity to see certain changes so that they can prepare their own communication materials that are or onboarding materials that are perfectly customized just for their individual company and their company's individual Jira, and say, hey, these changes are coming. You can communicate it however you like to your users.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I would definitely, if there are people reading or watching this that have gotten the Jira changes and felt negatively about them, then I would never claim that we've gotten it absolutely right every time.
So I'm just curious, what led to, let's do a big, huge redesign now? Just what led to the thought process, timing wise, when you should do it, how over what time period? Since it sounds like, I think you actually said last 6 to 9 months, and then it keeps rolling out. So some of us, I think, are more used to release cycles of a much shorter time frame, but also it's probably for a much smaller client base, and there's just a lot of different reasons. So I guess it'd be really great to get a little bit into more of the mentality or thought process of why now, what was the impetus for it?
Yeah. So where to start? Yeah, like I said, some of the concepts and that we are rolling out now have been in the works for at once. So we just, in general, the most consistent theme that we get from our customer feedback, all of our product management decisions at Atlassian are driven by essentially two things. One is, how do we grow the number of people using our products? And second, how do we make sure that those people are happy? Whether it's NPS or another metric, we want to improve, customer satisfaction, we want to improve growth. And both of those basically rely on our products being, simple, easy to use, and but simultaneously powerful enough a nice a massive cliff right at the beginning. So it's easy to get started, but you grow over time. And so there's been across Atlassian, we've made big investments in I wouldn't say just simply, but making our products simple and powerful, and improving the overall usability of the products. So one is just a recognition that we wanted to make a big investment in simplicity and usability for our products, and that was more important than any new functionality that we could add. Second vector is that across not just Jira, but Atlassian, we wanted to bring our products, all of our different products closer together, so that whether you're using Jira or Confluence or Stride or Bitbucket, or any of our different experiences in the cloud as we grow, and we have new products like Trello coming on board, we want to start building more consistent experiences across the Atlassian properties. And so it's easier if you've been using one, you can get started with the other. It's good business for Atlassian, good experience for our customers. And third is just a big investment in modernizing the look and feel of our products. It's 2018. Our products should look like they were built in 2018, not 2001. And so, we want to make sure that we're using the latest, the latest technologies that are feasible, and that our products look up to date, fresh, clean, and modern. And basically, if you're going to change the front end technologies that you're using, if you're going to redesign the look and feel and the fonts and colors, and if you're going to change the navigation, you might as well try. It's a bunch of things that kind of all happened at once, and then are all easier to do if you do it at once, even if it kind of becomes, it's definitely not easy, but it's probably better than if we played it out over a course of 5, 6, 7 years. The other thing I would say is that you think about delivery cycles, and so you can say that like 6 to 9 months is definitely a long delivery cycle. 18 to 24 months is probably more accurate, but at the same time, when you're on a team, it doesn't. I would say Jira is releasing new stuff and new code to customers. A dozen times a day. So you're as a individual person working on a team, you don't feel like even if we're progressively shipping a more evolved experience to more and more customers over time. So you kind of have an ongoing slow burn of release rather than building up to a single kind of big bang release, which would be more difficult to manage for on a product and marketing side. It's riskier on an engineering side. It creates a larger burden on our support team. And honestly, our customers, it's almost definitely better to, customers, you don't like change at all, but at the same time, you want to make sure that we, usually it's better to kind of go with the slow and steady approach.
Like bite-sized pieces.
Exactly.
Yep. No, I totally understand that. So you're known for having no sales team, and I just wanted to know, because you talk a lot about how you're getting the feedback from the users and seeing how they're reacting to it, the feedback, and obviously there's ways that you can track what are the usage rates of the feature, and then probably from the opt-ins and odds you can also get some feedback. But is it that during this time period, you product managers that are all involved, are you now hitting the ground even more than before to hear what the feedback is like? I guess, without one big component that some other folks generally rely on also to provide feedback, does that mean it's now on your team in the market, to do more during this whole time period where you're rolling out things?
Yeah, I definitely don't think that not having a support team, it's just the volume of feedback it's like a tidal wave coming in. So other companies, maybe it's going in through a defined channel, and then it's coming in whichever any crack in the armor. Maybe that's not the right metaphor. But first and foremost is before, like anything that we build goes through extensive what we call early signal testing. If there's a way for me later, I'd be happy to share some presentations on this exact topic from the designer on my team on early signal testing that we had at our Summit user conference back in September. But how do we validate, not just let's put some prototypes in front of customers, but come up with defined scorecards that measure the usability of the baseline of the old experience and then the new experience before we start engineering it all, to have confidence that across X, Y, and Z, our new experience is definitely going to improve the time that a user spent on a task, the likelihood that they're going to complete the task, their assessment of the ease of use of that task after they finished it. Once we start rolling features out, in addition to, definitely when you opt out, we ask you if you opt out, but and in addition to our general NPS feedback collection. So if you're using the product for any length of time, you're going to get an NPS survey. But we actually adopted a second metric that was specifically focused on usability called UX Lite. And so it's a survey that looks a little bit similar to NPS, and it basically says, it's a 2-question survey. The first question is on a 1 to 7 scale, does this product meet your needs? And then the second question is, was this product easy to use? And so basically you've got these two sliders, and you're and then
both 1 to 7 scales, or
yeah.
And why 1 to 7?
Because that's what the people who wrote the paper used, for lack of this is definitely, you can look up, like, there's been studies of a bunch of different software, and everything from QuickBooks to Slack. You can see what their scores were, because independent researchers have kind of run these surveys, and so we look at it not for individual features, but for our product, and it's good for getting a concrete measure of usability, which is rather than general customer satisfaction, because maybe you make it easier to use, but the performance got worse, or the bugs went up, or something like that. So in the one area that we are trying to move right now are the experiences we're shipping getting better. On top of that, and then we collect qualitative feedback on top of that as well. We have different self-prompted feedback collectors all over the product. Our biggest problem is making sure that there's not more than one link to give feedback on any given screen, so that because you're constantly trading off between, you don't want to overwhelm users with feedback links, but at the same time, every team that's working on a different component of the product experience wants the most specific feedback possible. Like, if I don't have to triage through 9 other teams' feedback to get the 1 out of every 10 feedbacks that's about the thing that I care about, then I'm going to try to implement that for myself. And so you're finding the right balance there. And then on top of that, so that's kind of how the structured feedback or unstructured qualitative feedback comes in. And on top of that, and those are probably our primary source for, so when you give that type of feedback, you have the option to allow us to contact you, and that's probably our number 1 source for customer interviews at once. So obviously we don't contact every customer for a follow-up email or interview, but if it's really good or really bad, or actually probably not the really good ones, but we look for ones where we think that we can really follow up and get some useful insight. And then on top of that, we're always paying attention to the customer forums, customer public feature requests and bug tracker, and then our support cases as well that are all kind of different sources of feedback and a bunch of tooling that we built on top to kind of aggregate it all together.
Right, I can see the tidal wave of feedback sources.
Yeah, I would definitely say, in addition to kind of actively seeking it out, because you don't have, it definitely puts more pressure on the product management and design teams ourselves to, triage and aggregate and, sift, because you don't have an account manager or a customer success manager who kind of listens to their customers and then summarizes it all and hands it to you in that kind of situation.
Right. Well, Dave, we're actually about to run out of time, so I thought perhaps before we wrap up, if you could share one last kernel of wisdom for all of us based on this topic.
Sure. You should have prepped me for this. The last kernel of wisdom, I think no matter how experienced you are as a product manager, no matter how much you think you know about your product or how much you know about your users, how long you've been working on it, it's always important to kind of approach the changes that you're making to your product with a sense of humility. It's not just, you can always learn something more about your customers, but you can always do a better job of understanding how your customers feel about the product and how the decisions that you make impact their lives. And, just applying a little bit more empathy when you're thinking about your goals and the minds of your customers is probably something that would leave us all with better technology products.
Thank you. Absolutely, I think empathy is really key. So I think with that, I'd like to say a really big thank you to Dave for being our guest host today and for sharing your thoughts on the very interesting ways that you've been able to roll out your massive product changes. So thank you very much for your time today, Dave.
Thank you.
And thank you all very much for joining us as well. We're going to make the recording and the summary of this available when it's ready. In the meantime, I wanted to just share some news, if you hadn't heard yet, that we'll have PMF heading to Singapore. And so we'll be having a 2-day conference on the 18th and 19th of June at the INSEAD Singapore campus. And so if you want any more information, stay tuned to the productmanagementfestival.com website. Our newsletter will obviously also provide updated information. And our call for speakers is now open for that event as well. So hope you all take care, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you. Bye.